Hello, everyone. This is Tijen Genco, Master Certified Coach and Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach. And you are tuned into Coaching with Mastery and Elegance with Tijen Genco. And now you met already with our new beautiful companion, Cynthia Late, and she is with us. Welcome, Cynthia. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, Tijen, and thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. And Cynthia, where are we going today in this conversation?
So today, this is going to be a very interesting conversation. We're going to talk about stories. Um,
Oh,
so I'm going to ask you all sorts of questions around stories and how they fit into coaching. So let's first kind of check in. What makes us tell stories?
okay. I think that coming from a lineage of storytellers in my background, I love storytelling, but um, I think there are many reasons that people tell the stories for that. One is cultural transformation, right? That the passing on the wisdom, passing on the cultural norms, passing on the learned lessons that is a traditional way of training and passing the lineage in a way. The other reasons could be finding a common ground. This also happened to me. I understand your stories. Here is mine. I mean no harm, and finding ways to connect. And I think that's the real intent behind the storytelling, our needs to connect and appreciate each other, because the stories tell our life experiences, who we are, and what's happening to us. The other things that can be, which may be more relevant to coaching, right? The psycho-emotional component, that the story is in one way to process, or repetitive stories tell us that we still yet to process, but there is a way that the biochemistry of expressing the self through the storytelling, and then also explaining the way we received the life experiences to another human being. This happened to me, and so on. And sometimes it's an hidden way to ask for our needs to be met. If
Mhm.
you are keep telling, which is going to be probably another podcast episode, keep telling the stories with the same moral of the story, then you're asking for some way of needs to be met. So there are many reasons that we tell a story.
Yeah, it just makes me think when my kids were small, and it's the same themes would come up. They would want something, and I would hear repeated stories about how this was important to their life as children. So the repeated story is very much something that
Yes.
people do. The other
Yeah.
thing I wanted to share about stories, I think stories make things easier for people to remember. What do you think about that? To remember thoughts and
Yeah.
concepts.
Absolutely. I mean, it is because there is an emotional impact and magnitude, right?
Mhm.
In there, that it will help them to remember. And as you know, that in neurologic approach to coaching that I teach this, that the way we relate to the story, our model of the world actually comes out. And if it is a handed down story, then it almost gives an impression of how that particular cultures or
Yeah.
lineage sees and relates to the world around that. Certainly, there is that aspect, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So what might be the psychological impact of storytelling in the coaching process?
In the coaching process, I think in multiple ways, right? That the clients are often not experienced, not processed the whatever the experience is. So they are unpacking that what is happening, and that could be unpacking emotions, unpacking memories, unpacking what's the magnitude of the experiences. When I coach C-level people, right, they have a very condensed life in a short time frame. So then they come to the session, they have a lot of stories to unpack. So that's that. And also they may not have reflected, the client may not have reflected on to figure out what happened. So then they can't really say, I processed this and that, and so coach me on this thing. They're going to tell us the story looking for what happened to them, right? Or you're like, oh, you have a boo. Okay, let me see. So yeah, that's that. Most of the time, I think that either that they are wanting to process a trauma that is repeating itself that needs to find a place, or unpacking to reorganize their mind and how they structure things. Those are the main reasons that I see.
And it's so true. I've talked with clients and things happen and they are so busy with their lives, everything gets stored away in this bookshelf behind there. And as
Yeah.
coaches invite them to open the book, and then all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute. And there's just all of this extra surprise that shows up when they open that book.
You know, remember there used to be greeting cards. When you open it, it will come out like a 3D that
I didn't know that was there. Oh my goodness. But this is why we coach. This is all these insights that we have, and it really helps with clients, which actually leads to my next question. So in what aspects do the client stories serve as a tool for transformation in the coaching process?
Yeah, this is where this listening comes in, right? As I talk about holistic listening, that it has a lot to do with the coaching process. But what I see is that inexperienced coaches, or the coaches with poor listening capabilities and skills, often get lost in the details, or they have a like a magnetism towards the drama. So they're going to be interested in what has happened to who or whatever. And then that's not as helpful. But if we're listening to tonality, where the client's pitch is changing, where the client's rhythm in their speaking is changing, where the whatever the words that they are repeating, and then obviously the moral, right? What is the moral of the story? What makes them tell me this story? These curiosities are important to unpack exactly and clarify what it is that they are telling us. Yeah.
And one of my impressions is sometimes they don't even know what I've seen is they start a story and then they go off on this tangent and they end up somewhere they never planned on. And you're like, oh, what happened? What just happened here?
Yeah, and I call that a hallways of the mind. And then some eventually find their ways back to the main main entrance. Some won't, and especially this becomes distractive
Mhm.
for the coaches, that they feel like they're going to keep following the client in every hallway. And then they also invite the clients like, oh, what about this door? What about that door? And I think those stories of like a Bluebeard or 10,001 Night, and then they keep exploring different rooms and they never figure out what is happening with the main castle.
Yeah, it's definitely a practice to really listen to what's underneath the story and the words and the emotions.
Yeah, yeah.
So actually, on that line, could you share your approach to managing sessions where storytelling overshadows the coaching objectives?
Yeah, and I think that some of this is, again, the coach's distractive behavior, getting so much into the story, or they think they're going to go wherever the client goes, or they invite client to go other places, right? The client gives the story, and then I hear in experienced coach responding, "Oh, what else you want to talk about today?" Well, they just gave you information. You haven't done anything with that. Right? Reflect on it. Then client has to think about something else to satisfy your needs. So I think that gets distractive. But reflecting on the magnified emotions, reflecting on the moral of the story. And as I teach this, we can provide the link on the show notes, Transcendental Coaching, which is my niche and the methodology that I teach. And I teach this in the neurologic approach to coaching clients' relationship to the story. Is the way they tell the story enabling them, empowering them, or how are they ending up in the story? What character do they play in their own story, right? Often people with the disempowerment tendencies, they will put some other character as a main character in their story. Then they're gonna have nothing else to do but to be victimized, right? So, right? Who is the main character? What are they doing in there? And I often tell people, so, okay, what is the title of your story? And what do you need to be doing with these characters? You put them in there. So, yeah, that those things needs to be looked at and presented back as a reflection. And sometimes I would also say this seems like we're going different circles and different stories, or it's actually there seems to be a lot of storytelling then relating to their connection or the morals of the story. And then we can get curious about that behavior, right? What makes you tell a lot of story when I'm asking you challenging question, or when I'm reflecting this, whatever it is happening, we reflect on that to show that how the behavior relates to the storytelling.
So you've mentioned reflection a couple of times, and I'd love to invite you to. I've seen reflection work incredibly well as a tool, but what makes reflection so useful as a coaching tool?
I think that the reflection, we actually are aware when we're telling the story, but I don't know if we really hear what we're saying. So in a way, it gives us the complex reflections. I mean, verbatim reflections somewhat does something and it helps people to think that they're being heard, but I don't find them as helpful. But the complex reflections or the relationship reflections to the client's story, they are helpful to show them what is it that we understood. And that actually connects us deeper and enables further trust in the session. It summarizes whatever that they are presenting and demystifies and distills, as I say it in my book, that helps clarify a lot of things in a session. Yeah.
And I love that you brought up connection because I've had sometimes when I've reflected something innocently and my client is almost brought to tears because they're like, "Oh wow, this really happened." And all of a sudden we're getting deeper into what's going on for them. So I love that you brought that up. I think it's in coaching schools, I don't know if reflection is a lot of times brought up as important as it can really be in a coaching session.
I agree with you. They often teach a lot of the schools that I assess around the world often teach the summarization and bottom lining, but that's not really bring deeper resonance.
Yeah.
that the deeper rapport comes from a deeper reflection that understands, help the other person to see how well you understand them. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes them feel seen, and it's something that I think is very rare nowadays.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
So when you talk about storytelling, let's say the client storytelling almost becomes a barrier, and you alluded to this earlier. Um, how do you navigate the conversation when there's just so much story?
Well, again, the best thing that I could offer is to reflect on that behavior, right? What makes this person wanting to tell a lot of stories? Are they not giving themselves enough time to unpack? Um, uh, is there a need to hide behind the storytelling? We need to be curious about that. And I cannot say it is this one particular reason because we are all unique. It depends on the session and so on. But we need to point out the behavior, what's happening in the moment, if there are a lot of distracted ways of storytelling.
Yeah. And are there other techniques to be used when a client dominates a session with their story so that it's more of a balanced dialogue in
I
addition to?
think that puts coaches listening skills at work, right? We need to distill more, listen deeply, and keep distilling and reflecting on what are we hearing and extracting from their storytelling. And if we get lost in the details, then the session can go all over the place, right? That because we're not touching what the thing is. So the more than the coaches develop their presence and deep listening and observing and connecting and distilling, as I say, that becomes helpful, especially for the verbal processing clients, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if you're in a situation when you've lost track of a client's story, and I know I've been there before, it's kind of awkward to stop them and say, "Wait, explain this to me again," because they might not feel heard. What do you recommend in those situations?
Thankfully, it doesn't happen to me. As a mentor, I would say, first of all, then the coach needs to be curious about what makes me check out.
Mhm.
You can present that. Like, I'm having a difficult time listening to you. And I wonder if it is just happening in our session or it happens somewhere else. So that could be something, being honest about it. Another thing would be to the coaches then coming back and saying, again, that seems challenging for me to understand where we're going. What is it that you want us to really understand and unpack, right? So there is the ownership of the coach and then the ownership of the client. That's the true partnership. We own the coaching structure, but we don't own the content of the session. If something is happening, both of us contributing to that. So I think those would be the honest ways to respond. And then coach should then also will be helpful for them to have this discussion with their mentors and see if this is happening often to them or a particular story, inviting them to their areas of unprocessed
Mhm.
parts or emotions. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up that it is a partnership. And so if you're getting lost, it's interesting to kind of have that conversation with your client.
Yeah, I mean, we need to own some part of it, but if the other person is keep running around, it's hard to follow an ADD kid around, right?
Yeah, and I have one client in mind that I've worked with in the past where there was just all of this work situation happening, and this person did this, and all of this drama. And it really came down to there was part of her that really enjoyed the drama, not consciously, but subconsciously, and I was like, okay, let's talk about that piece. And we finally, it took us a few sessions to get there because there was a lot of storytelling, and I was a newer coach, so I wasn't as comfortable navigating those waters. It takes some experience to work through these.
Absolutely right. What is the commonality of the
Mhm.
main character of the story? You can even ask them, like, okay, you have this story, that story, this story. What is the main line? If this was a book,
Yeah.
what would the main character would be doing? And that sort of thing. Absolutely, yeah.
Well, that's great advice. It's a great question.
Yeah.
Um, when might it be beneficial for a coach to share their own story during a session?
I think that to establish a trust in some way, or to show that the coach can appreciate what the client might be going through in a brief way. Or sometimes it's not their own story, but the telling a story to in a way of a reflection, not necessarily this is what I'm hearing and that's what you've done, but like, okay, once upon a time there was a king and they had a horse and this, and so what comes up for you? And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, now I get that. So it's a metaphorical play. So it could be one of those things to establish a more deeper connection and a rapport, appreciation of the similar experiences as we talked in the beginning, or really pointing out the behavior without pointing out the behavior
Mhm.
in a gentle way.
So when I've coached, what I've done in the past, sometimes I've said, yes, I've seen this happen with other clients, and this is what their reaction, or this is what happened to them. And that seems to normalize whatever has happened to the client. So I just would curious to hear your thoughts around that kind of a story.
I usually don't talk about the other people's experiences. I can tell stories from mythology or their other places.
Mhm.
Um, and I understand, just saying I understand in a really deeply way, that also normalizes.
Yeah.
So that's not a technique that I use, but
Mhm.
it looks like it's working well for you and your clients. So that actually speaks to its validity. And it's in a way to, as you said, it appreciate and normalize to say there are other people are going through a
Mhm.
similar thing.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Mhm.
And then when might sharing a personal story be counterproductive to a client's coaching journey?
I think that as anything, we need to look for the intent.
Mhm.
And I mentioned that when I was going through my training, Marion Franklin was one of my mentors, and she told me in one of the sessions, do not waste prime real estate. That stayed with me, right? What is the purpose of me sharing this? Everything we share needs to have a purpose and has to have this is where I talk about the precision, right? Not wasting anything. So what is it that we want to share and why we want to do that? And if the underlying reason is to self-validate or make us look better or whatever that is, that may not be helpful. So when the stories don't have a clear purpose, or they're not serving the client, or they are taking away clients' opportunities to discover and learn themselves, whatever it is. Think about, like, you want to do something and your mom tells you, oh, you have to do it this way. I did that, and that's the best way, right? When it was like that, don't do it. But those are some of the things that come into my mind that may not be as helpful.
And I've when I've been in coaching situations where a coach has told me a story, I find it also disconnects me because all of a sudden it becomes about the coach rather than about me as the
Exactly.
client.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's I often say to my mentees, right? That the client needs to be in the center stage during the entirety of the session.
Mhm.
Even the close-ended questions like, did I get it right? Is it right? That requires client to leave that space to validate you. Now you are in the center stage. So anything that coach is saying needs to stay behind it. So yeah, beautiful way to share that, Cynthia.
Wonderful. So now I would love to hear maybe an example of a particular story that you've shared in coaching that consistently inspires or enlightens your clients. Are there any good samples?
Yeah, I use when the like in the political environment of the corporate world, I use a story that when the people tell me I can't direct communicate, I can't say this to them and so on, that I tell the story of a king, that the king had a favorite horse and the horse got sick. So the king actually said, I want to bring every healer to here to make sure. The king said it to his vizier that hire everybody and do these things. And but if whomever that comes to me and says horse is dead, their heads will be chopped off. So and the vizier tries and does everything, and the horse eventually dies. So then the vizier comes to the king to say, my dear king, that your horse is lying down and not getting up. And the horse's mouth is open but not breathing. Horse's eyes are closed. And then the king says, why don't you tell me that the horse is dead? And he says, I didn't say that. You said it. So this brings a little humor, and then they see what is going on, and then they start to think their way around. How does this story lands on you, Cynthia?
No, I love it. And I actually love that you brought up humor because I think stories can do that. Sometimes a lot of our coaching topics can get a little heavy. And when you bring in story, especially when you bring in mythology, all of a sudden it becomes less of a burden. And
Yeah,
then you can play with it. And it goes back to the point you made earlier, where when you're in this lighter space, it's easier to access other parts of yourself.
yeah.
So I love that you told that story.
Yeah, because you no longer you in the position of the vizier, but you're thinking, oh, well, I can do that too. I can do the other thing, like you were saying, other people having this problem too. It's in a way, it's also neurologic coaching. It creates the space
Hmm.
between the coach and then a client and an experience. And then all of a sudden there is this metaphoric relationship, then the things can become possible from that.
Absolutely. And I just love this topic of stories because I've had clients come back to me months after we've coached and they say, I still remember this one story you told me. And I have no recollection of ever telling the story, but somehow it helped them. I'm like, this is wonderful. We'll keep doing that. So as we come to the end of our time together, what else would you like to share about stories that we haven't talked about yet?
I think that there are times also our personal stories can be told in a session to inspire and again connect and inspire when the people are going through a difficult time. So sometimes I do tell like the challenge that I moved through and the method that I have done to get myself through it. And then I ask them in a very brief way, what inspires you, if anything, in this, and so on. So sometimes that could be helpful. But what I would say that I am not always the best remembering the names or the faces, but the stories touch me. So I can actually remember 5 years ago what we talked about in that coaching session. And because the storytelling creates an imprint in my psyche. So I think that it's important for us also to understand what is the storytelling doing to me as a coach, and how am I relating to the other person through the story. And you know that I often talk about whatever that you need to work on, and whether you worked on it or not will come to you in the form of a client. So how is it that whatever the client is telling you, how is that animated in your life? And what are you doing about it? And often that whenever the my student coaches complain about, oh, the client is talking too much, they have so many things to say, and then I say to them, what are you saying that actually expands the conversation? So I think that self-awareness is also important, and the way we bring our presence into the coaching. What is in our presence enabling the story? What is in our presence enabling the moral in the story, or disabling the story? What are we doing? So those are the additional things that come into my mind.
You know, it's one of the things that came to mind as you were talking was that I think stories, for me, sometimes I found that when clients came to me, there's a little bit of a power where you're the coach, tell me what to do, and I'm the client. And all of a sudden, when you start sharing your story, it kind of helps. And you talked about this earlier, this connection, but it also makes us more human when we
Mm.
share where we've struggled. And yeah, I still do that. And it helps with the connection and the partnership. So I love how story is such a useful tool in coaching.
Yeah, I mean, as we said it in the beginning, there is that connection and
Mm,
psycho-emotional connection and appreciation and understanding.
mm,
And I often use this in my leadership coaching, that there is a story where the British went to India and they were like giving orders on how they want to conquer the land and so on. And Mahatma Gandhi says, of course, we'll talk about all of it, but let's have a chai first. So, so there is that sort of an invitation. Let's have a tea and then figure this out together. That kind of companionship. Yeah.
it is. It's wonderful. Well, Tijen, thank you so much for all of your insights around stories and storytelling.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you for having this beautiful conversation for us.
Yes. And so what do you have that's upcoming that you want to share with us?
Yes, so talking about the stories and what did they do, right? I just released two things on over the weekend, and I'm excited about. Last year, I visited Apollo's temple in Greece, that the healing temple. And what they did in the ancient times, which was also a methodology in the Turkey as well, that they were using dreaming as part of the healing that accesses the different part of the psyche, just like the stories we're talking about. So I've visited that temple, went in through the different chambers and connected to the pieces. So I haven't been doing much of the healing workshops this year because of the my schedule. So I decided to offer a 4-week workshop on that I will be guiding people into the guided meditation journey in different parts of that temple. And they will be meeting with different guides, and then understand that part of the depth of the psyche. And then they come back, we'll have a group discussion about what they discovered and what was that about. And then they also get to go to the breakout room with their classmates to further discuss. So it's going to be very gentle, very deep, transformative journey and it's listed in the upcoming events, Healing Journey to Asclepios Temple. And I will put it in the show notes. And another one is that I've been receiving a lot of the requests having to develop a National Board Health and Wellness Coaching exam prep course. We have a 100% success rate on that. And now I finally finished developing the similar course for ICF's knowledge exam. And I've been gathering all over the world the case studies, including my experiences and the ones that I do assessments on and my students on. So these are very rich case studies to go over to prepare people to the exam. So that's another one. It's going to start in November. And then the mentoring, group mentoring starts in August. We still have 3 seats left on that, limited seating left on that. Yeah, so exciting events.
Well, you are busy, and I have to say, I've always loved your guided meditations. They're usually very beautiful, and something interesting always comes up with them. So thank you for putting those in your next session. And then the ICF knowledge assessment is definitely challenging. I've taken it, and so if I hadn't already taken, I'd be signed up for that prep class because there's there's just so much. Everybody talks about how hard it is, and so just getting that, not worrying about that, and really just doing the work to prep for it would be super helpful.
Thank you for both, Cynthia. And I also want to say that whether people are taking the exam or not, it is helpful, even if you have taken the exam, helpful to participate because these are complex case studies. So often that richness is not present because when the people are preparing these exams, they're not really real life coaches, right? They are course developers and so on, but I'm presenting very rich life case studies to discuss them with your colleagues. It's a good opportunity if anybody like, oh, what to do in here and what to do there, because I have examples from executive coaching, life coaching, health and wellness coaching, all sorts of different parts of the practice. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting one. Thank you for your affirming
Yeah,
feedback. Absolutely.
I might reconsider.
I love having you with us in anything you come. Yeah. Yeah, these are fun things to go through and very different things, right? One is more like intellectual, oh, and another one's like, oh my goodness. So yeah. And I put the journey one in a Friday afternoon, depending on where you are, and in the time zone, but for the New York time, it's going to be 4 p.m. So that I thought it would be good way ease into the weekend so that we can unpack our own stories, right? Yeah, yeah. Anything you would like to share before we come close,
So
Cynthia?
I've actually been so inspired by stories. Recently, I've been focusing on helping clients who are a little bit older looking for work. And there are a lot of stories around ageism. Nobody will hire me, I'm told, to find work. And I got really tired of hearing
Yeah.
this idea, this thought. So I'm in the process of hiring success stories of people who are a little bit older, 50, 55, and 60. And I've already got about collection of 10 put together, and I want to get a nice big collection. So I've had asks out if anybody knows of somebody who got hired or found work at a later time in life, I would love to speak with them as I collect this set of success stories, because a lot of it isn't what people think it is. There's a lot more to it in finding work, no matter what your age is. So I'm excited.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Yeah, we'll also remind your how people can connect with you in the show notes. We'll do that. And I also invite you to actually maybe tell that story via your artistry, right? Excellent. Yeah. Well, thank you, Cynthia, for our time together. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to us. If you missed it in the beginning, this is Coaching with Mastery and Elegance with Tijen Genco, an original podcast from Genco Coaching. Our intent is to bring self-awareness concepts to everyone and skillful ideas and additional information to the coaches. So if you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing and sharing the goodness with others, and feel free to share your feedback with us. Until next time, be well.